There is a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. And that's why I am on the trail of the Nephilim. This is a recorded program where Thomas Winder is with us. He is in the Golan Heights, on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. So this is going to be really interesting. We have a slideshow. We'll present that to you. But first, a word from our very trusted sponsor. Folks, here's the hard truth. Every 6 years, your dollar loses half its buying power. So let's say you got $100,000 in savings today. It could feel like you only have $50,000 by 2031. But there is a way to protect and preserve your money. Folks, it's gold. Noble Gold Investments makes it easy to own gold or silver, no pressure, no call centers, just honest one-on-one support. Open a qualified account and get a free 10-ounce silver American flag bar. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. Remember, folks, there's always a risk with any investment, but I have to tell you, Peggy and I invested in Noble Gold years ago, and man, am I glad we did. It could go over $4,000. It could go lower. We don't know what it's going to do. I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't want one. But noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, L.A. It's my pleasure.
So before we start, showing the pictures and having you weigh in on them, tell us exactly where you are and what's going on in the north part of Israel in regard to the ongoing war. What's happening there?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question, because this year it's nice and calm. Everything's peaceful right now, unlike it was last year when those 12 kids were killed on the soccer field here in Majdal Shams, which is the capital of the Syrian Druze. It's in the Golan Heights today. But all of the Golan Heights was part of Syria until 1973, when Israel finally pushed the Syrians over the top of the hill, and basically the summit of the mountain was the border. Now, thank God, the war has been pushed at least another 25 miles into Syria. So there aren't any more rockets flying in our direction.
Wow.
The skies are not filled with F-16s. Bombs are not going off all over the place. And we don't have any fires at all anymore. The only tragedy at this time, and please keep the Druze in your prayers, just a couple weeks ago on the Syrian side, over 100 Druze were slaughtered in the same fashion as October the 7th. And they even killed the mayor of this Druze village on the other side. And of course, those are all cousins. Those are all aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters of the people that live here, because after all, they've lived here for over 1,000 years. So it's kind of like being on a reservation in America, where really no one is from the outside world is welcome to live here. This happens to be the ski resort town for the skiers on Mount Hermon. They have to go through us to go skiing. So in the wintertime, there's a whole bunch of tourists coming for a couple days to go skiing. In the summertime, there's just about no one. And I have the ultimate privilege of being the first and only outsider since before the Ottoman Empire, by the way, before World War I, that's ever been invited to live here. So I'm humbled by the whole thing. The Lord had brought me here and has kept me here. I could go on and on about the miracles. They're just phenomenal. They happen almost every day around here. It's wonderful.
And for those of you who don't know, Mount Hermon, I've been to Mount Hermon, and it is, and I'll let Thomas, because Thomas lives there. He knows a lot more about it than, the few hours that I spent there. But this is where all the mischief started. This is where the 200 watcher angels come down in the days of Jared. This is all from the book of Enoch. And I get it. Some of you out there will go, oh, Marzulli's talking about the book of Enoch again. If you were going to keep one book out of parishioners' hands, that's the book you keep out. And Jude quotes from it before. You don't quote for something unless it's part of your wheelhouse. And Jude's quoting from it. So as part of his wheelhouse, he's read this thing. He knows it inside out, which is why it's there. And again, if you were going to keep one book, because it talks about the seed war, it tells you exactly what's going on. It gives the name of these fallen angels, tells you exactly what they're doing, the mixing of the seed, Genesis 3:15, it's all there.
According to First Enoch and the book of Julian and the book of Jasper and a whole ton of ancient Near Eastern texts, it was this mountain, Mount Hermon. In fact, the name Hermon means oath, because Charles Warren in 1865 found a stela, a big, huge granite rock that was carved with the very oath that these bad angels took when they landed here, so no one would renege on what their purpose actually was, which is what you mentioned was to corrupt the bloodline, to try to stop Messiah and corrupt the world. And it all happened right here on Mount Hermon. All the giants, the first wave of Nephilim were born right here. Wow. And that would be Baal, Melech, Chemesh, Dagon, and later on, of course, the goat demon named Pan, where Jesus goes to Pan's altar. And of course, this is what we're going to talk about. So I'll leave that back to you. Go ahead.
So what am I looking at here? I know what I'm looking at, but I want you to...
Yeah, that is the snow-covered Mount Hermon. And if you'll see, it's sort of flat on the top.
Yes.
There's quite a few different summits up there. There's not just one. There was a summit on the Syrian side, a summit on the Lebanon side, a summit on the Israeli side. Thank God Israel controls the entire mountain now. So hopefully rockets won't come over the top of the mountain anymore and land in the middle of our town.
Let me ask you this. Is it safe to say, is this a correct statement, that this is the first time in thousands of years that Israel has finally regained control of Mount Hermon? Is that a fair statement?
Well, it's actually the first time.
Okay.
Because back in ancient times, all they did was get as far as Tel Dan. The Danites only came to the top of basically the Hula Valley. They didn't take the Golan Heights at that time, and they didn't take the mountain at that time. They just went as far north as Tel Dan.
So do you think this has prophetic implications? If this is the first time that Israel as a nation, and they've been called back, they're in the land, never to be plucked up out of that land again, Amos 9:14 and 15. Square that. If you have that anti-Israel sentiment, then just go to Amos 9:14 and 15 and tell me what that means. I will plant them in their land, and never again will they be plucked up out of the land that they have given them. So the fact that Israel now controls the high country, I wasn't aware of this. I thought they had control of it in antiquity, but you're correcting me, which is fine. I stand corrected that this is the first time in all of history that Israel has actually gained control of not only the Golan, but now Hermon.
That is correct. And prophetically speaking, Israel doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger. You go back to Genesis, chapter 15 and the Abrahamic covenant. Abraham and his promised descendants get all the land eventually from the river of Egypt clear to the river Euphrates. So there's a whole lot more coming. So this is just the preliminary step. Also, you may not realize this, and I've been preaching this a whole bunch since December when Syria fell to the hands of ISIS and this guy Al Jolani. That is actually in the book of Isaiah, chapter 17, where it says right before the demise of Damascus, and Damascus is turned into a pile of rubble, the remnant of Aram, that's Aram, the remnant of Aram turned back to their creator and the Holy One of Israel and become sons of Israel. The remnant of Aram just happens to be the Syrian Druze that live on Mount Hermon, the slopes of Mount Hermon. So that's happening right now as we speak.
And you're directly involved in that because you're
yeah, because I'm the Christian minister here in town, and I pass out Bibles like candy. They actually came to me last year when that terrible, tragedy happened on the soccer field on July 27th. And I was doing prayer vigils on the soccer field. I was invited to the parents' homes to pray for the parents and the families. And LA, I don't know how to do that. Honestly, I did the best I could, but these people actually were ministering to me because their answer was, and this is what they said to everyone. This will touch your heart. I've told so many churches this and people start crying. But you and I, of course, would want to nuke the blanks, the blankety blanks. If they killed our children, that would be the first response. These people are so connected to the Holy Spirit and their God that they said, no, please do not use the spirits of our children to escalate the war. Rather, use the spirits of our children to stop the killing. I was touched. It blew me away.
Well, that's unprecedented.
They were ministering to me. Wow. I meant, boy, did I grow, because that's a whole lot more Christ-like than us Christians.
Very, very true. So you're standing, I'm assuming, these are some of the ancient tombs that you're.
Okay, this is a great picture because I did the paper on what mountaintop that the transfiguration of Christ must have been on all of 30 years ago when I was going to seminary school in Jerusalem. I knew then what hilltop it took place on, but I didn't know why. I didn't have any theology behind it. I didn't know why Jesus went to Mount Hermon. I didn't know anything at the time about cultic temple sites. But after being here for so many years on Mount Hermon, I was able to hike all these mountaintops, find the high places, find the old cultic temple sites where the giants were worshipped. Wow. And they all have the same things in common, which later I found on that special hilltop where the transfiguration took place. And one of the main ingredients that you must have for a high place are tombs. There's always tombs underneath the high place because apparently people like to get buried near their gods, little g. Mm-hmm. So here on the side of the mountain, right below what is now called Nimrod's Fortress, it's always been called Nimrod's Fortress, but right below the fortress, I found 47 rock-hewn tombs that, by the way, Israel doesn't even know exist yet. They've never been excavated. There's only one that's ever been dug out, probably by night diggers, because and nobody ever goes on this side of the hill. And let me add one thing. This is literally right below the trail where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up the hill to what used to be a cultic temple site, the most important cultic temple site of all, that when the Islamists, when they built Nimrod's fortress 1,000 years ago, they didn't build the whole thing. They built the walls around what used to be standing there, I imagine, pre-flood construction. And by the way, I need to thank you personally, because I was staring at that mountain for 30 years. And when you told me to look for megalithic construction, I went back there after all these other high places, because, you have to have not just tombs, but you have to have standing stones. You have to have pits, which are springs where they dig out the ground and create a small pool so they can throw their offerings. You have to have these military walls for protecting the place, and niches to hold your statues of the gods. And of course, I went back to Nimrod's fortress after that, and right there, you said that you mentioned the debris field in front of the fortress, and I started picking up those rocks front and back, and believe me, it hit like a ton of bricks. Sorry for the pun, but it turns out that before the Islamists added on to the original structure to build the fortress and all the towers, they only built out of small stones.
Right.
They added on to what turned out to be Baal, we call him Baal, Baal's arch, the original Nephilim, the original giant, the head of all the other giants, the guy with the big horns, that people would, offer their babies to and have public orgies in front of. That's how the pagans would worship their gods. And of course, today we still have Baal around.
Oh, yeah.
He's still being worshipped to this day. His arch is still being set up in capital cities all around the world as a showcase of Baal. And of course, all you have to do is watch the Super Bowl halftime entertainment and the Academy Award.
Yeah, exactly. What are we looking at here?
Oh, great picture. That is a picture. That's a satellite picture of the top of the fortress. And right there where you see the Star of David, there just happens to be a hexagon wall line right around the only place on that whole hill that has not been built on, that happens to be directly behind what used to be Baal's arch. And right in the middle of that Star of David happens to be exactly the place where the transfiguration took place.
That is so deliberate. You were the one that we're at the airport in, I think it was Santa Fe, right?
Albuquerque,
right. So we're in Albuquerque. Gil Zimmerman, my business partner, myself, and I met you for the first time there. And we're sitting, we have like a 3-hour wait before we board, and we arranged it that way. So but this is before we went up through TSA and all that nonsense. And you're educating us. You're talking about Mount Hermon, the transfiguration. I want you to weigh in on that, because most people don't understand, and I didn't understand this, that this is not a 15-minute deal. This is going on when Jesus brings his disciples there. This is a whole thing. Tell us about that.
Well, we have to backtrack just a little bit. This picture you're showing right now, for instance, if you look closely, you'll see the parking lot close to the lower left corner.
Right.
And from the parking lot, there is a trail that follows the ridge right straight down to what we call the gate to Hades.
Right.
This story cannot be separated from what Jesus did during the Feast of Tabernacles. We find out in the story that Peter wants to build 3 Sukkots, or 3 tabernacles, one for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah. So that tells us that it's during the Feast of Tabernacles. So keeping that in mind, go back to when they first arrive at the district of Caesarea Philippi. These things, the story, of course, is found in Matthew 16 and 17, also in Luke chapter 9 and Mark chapter 9. And when you have to read Luke to fill in the blanks because Matthew doesn't tell you everything. So let's see what happens. Jesus arrives to the district of Caesarea Philippi, and immediately he asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And of course, the reply is the same thing you'd get today on the street. If you asked anybody, they would say, well, it was a great prophet or a great teacher or some sort of enlightened guru. They say, of course, some people say Elijah, some people say Jeremiah, at least one of the prophets. Well, then Peter, bless his heart, gets in there and says, after Jesus asks, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter responds, "Well, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And immediately Jesus gives him a promotion. He calls him Simon Bar-Jonah because flesh and blood couldn't have told him that, only his Father in heaven. So all of a sudden now, and this story is so important for the church, but the church doesn't understand.
I know.
The Catholics always tell people that Peter is the rock that the church is built on. We'll get there in a second. The Protestants say, no, Peter can't be the rock. Maybe it's Peter's confession that's the rock. Now, I disagree with both of those statements. Let me explain why. In the past, I used to say that maybe Jesus was tapping his chest, referring to himself as the rock that the church is built on. But I was wrong. I was dead wrong, just as much as the Catholics and the Protestants. Watch this. So, Isaiah 51 verse 1. To get this straight about who the rock is, because this is monumental. Isaiah says, "Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug." That picture you're showing right now, it is the gate to Hades, the pit to the underworld. And Jesus and his disciples would have been standing right where I happen to be teaching these two Jewish men from New York all about this story. So let me track it once more. Jesus says, "This is Peter," but in Greek, he doesn't call him Peter. He calls him Kepha, which is a little pebble. That is to bring his ego back down to earth because, of course, Peter is uneducated and he just got a big promotion to the son of Jonah. So Jesus says, "This is Petros, comma, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates to Hades will not overpower it. And I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." So what is Jesus doing when he says upon this rock? Well, it's not Peter, and it's not Peter's confession, and Jesus is not referring to himself. What is he referring to then? He's referring to the rock that he's standing on. He says, "Upon this rock I will build my church." Now then, the church is built on and by sinners. The church is built on sinners. Sinners redeemed, yet sinners that have been saved and turned into the army to be the army against the captain of sinners. So we all, you and I, had to be cut out of the rock of debauchery and lasciviousness, the rock of sin, to be saved in the first place. And then you and I are given, in fact, the whole church is given the keys to the kingdom of heaven so that we can cast out demons, so that we can have victory over the dark forces of this world. We are the army against the dark forces of this world, so that we had to be cut out of the rock of sin.
Wow. Let me go back to where we were. Okay, so we're here. That is the center of that is where Jesus, the transfiguration takes place. And this is an aerial shot showing where
that is the exact spot in the middle of that Star, David, right behind Baal's arch.
Wow.
Where, if you go today, you'll find what's left of what used to be a small temple site with standing stones and pits, walls for military protection, of course, niches cut into the standing stones for the the statues of the pagan gods, and Baal's own chair. I call it his throne, which is so it's bigger than a couch and about 6 feet tall. Now let's stay right there for a minute. Okay, so that obviously to any contractor who builds is cut at a curve.
Yep.
That came off of the top of Baal's arch, which used to start at least one of what used to be 4 arches that held the roof together. And there's a bunch of these things. And in that debris field in front, that's all there is, are all these carved stones. They're dolomite, the blue stone. And that means the entire top of the arch, which would have been rectangular, of course, sitting on top of these arches, was built out of blue dolomite. And they're all right there. And there's hundreds that are actually curved because they're part of an arch that came down. You'll love this. They came down after the fortress was built by the Islamists only 1,000 years ago. So the arch stood there and Baal's throne, his altar, when Jesus and the disciples showed up to meet up with Moses and Elijah. And the evidence is everywhere. There's nothing but megalithic stones. You can see all the earthquake damage that took place after the fortress was built. And believe me, if it had happened before, they would have cut up all these rocks and reused them.
Absolutely.
Because you never, ever leave rocks sitting around when you're building. You cut them up and use them again.
Let me jump in here. When I was we were supposed to meet you. Of course, the whole tour got canceled because of the war. We were slated October 7th. We were going to fly to Atlanta, and then from Atlanta to Israel. We were going to hook up with you with the tour, and the whole thing got canceled. The bottom line is, when I stood there, I've only been there one time. When I stood in front of a debris field, I did like a little vignette there on film, and I just said, what you're looking at is megalithic stones that were thrown down. Something very cataclysmic happened there. So what are we looking? What is this picture here? Is this a tomb?
Well, that's a shaft tomb that's directly below one of the high places called Bir in Soba, which is just one of 27 cultic temple sites identified again by Charles Warren back in 1865. These are the things that taught me what to look for around what we're looking at right now, which is Nimrod's fortress on top of the hill.
and you can see
There's a few
there in front of it. Those something cataclysmic has happened. Those stones are huge, by the way, and that's what you're alluding to. Something very cataclysmic happened, and these stones were not repurposed by the Islamists, which is that in itself is kind of bizarre. So
yeah, because they weren't there when they built the fortress.
Right.
The arch was still intact.
Right. So
the earthquake happened a couple hundred years later.
Let me set this up so people understand what's going on here. And we have to thank Gil Zimmerman for this, because it was Gil who said checkmate. And this is going back when you're lecturing us about all of this at the airport, and Gil's listening to this, Gil Zimmerman, my business partner, and goes, checkmate, because Jesus is there surrounded by occult temples. This is ground zero. This is where all the nonsense starts, and it's checkmate. Explain that to us, please.
Okay, so after the big meeting down at the gate to Hades,
right.
Chapter 17 of Matthew says clearly, after 6 days, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up the hill, up to a high mountain. In fact, the old translations say a high, lonely mountain. Well, believe me, that's not the top of Mount Hermon, like every single Protestant academic will tell you. Well, it must have been up there somewhere, probably on the summit. Well, they get to the summit from Caesarea Philippi is about a 6-day journey up and 5 coming back down, maybe 2. You could probably run down the hill. But in Luke chapter 9, verse 37, it says clearly that they went up for one night. They came down the next morning. So it has to be close by. And what did they do on that mountaintop? Well, this is going to just rock your socks, because 6 days after they get there, after the keys to the kingdom are given to the new declared church, all right, he goes up to the top of the mountain from Pan's altar at the gate to Hades, where upon this rock he declares his church, and he goes straight up the path, which is still there to this day. There is no other trail. It goes right straight to Baal's old arch, right straight to Baal's throne, where Jesus puts on the light show of light shows. By the way, 6 days later is the last night of the Feast of Tabernacles. At the exact same time in Jerusalem, annually, every single year, they put on a big light show trying to commemorate the pillar of fire that guided them through the wilderness for 40 years during their wilderness wanderings, when they finally were delivered from Egypt. So Jesus goes to the top of the hill from Pan's altar to Baal's altar for what you call checkmate, to put on the light show of all light shows, which I say is the pillar of fire that probably lasted all night long. We don't know. The script.
When I remember as a young Christian reading it and figuring, oh, they're up there for a half an hour, whatever. It's all night. It's
probably all night long, because when they come down the mountain the very next morning, they're met by a huge multitude of people waiting to find out what the heck was going down up there last night. It's so logical. By the way, this hilltop at Baal's altar, Baal's big arch, can be seen all the way to Tel Dan, all the way across the Hula Valley, and everybody saw it, not just 3 disciples and just them.
This is what ever the crowd when they come down.
That's right. Everybody saw the light show.
Wow.
It was not some little tiny ball of light. What's interesting about this is Moses and Elijah show up.
Right.
Now, this is really interesting because this is the picture of the church. Christ is the head of the church with Jew and Gentile overcomers as the body of the church. Moses is the great overcomer of the pagan fertility gods of Egypt. Elijah, believe it or not, is a Gentile. Says so in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. Elijah the Tishbite, he's Gentile, and he does the same thing. He overcomes the prophets and priests of Baal on Mount Carmel. And then he walks all the way to Mount Sinai in Arabia, by the way. That's another show.
Right.
Right. But so they both are the great overcomers. They are the picture of the church, Jew and Gentile, without the wall of enmity between them, the great overcomers who have been saved by the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And you have to turn to Luke to find out what their conversation is about. Matthew says they were having a conversation, but you have to turn to Luke to find out what that conversation is. And guess what? It's the conversation that the disciples hate the most. That's the same conversation that Peter got so mad at Jesus about,
Right.
And rebuked Jesus and told Jesus, no, you're not going to go suffer and die. Forbid it, God forbid it. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan, for your mind is not on the Father's will, but on your own will. So these disciples have to be shown who exactly Jesus is. In fact, the voice of God that comes out of this pillar of fire answers the original question of who do you say that I am? What does that, Ellie, you know what that voice said? It says, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased, and listen to him. Because the disciples didn't listen that closely. They didn't want the Messiah to suffer and die. They're looking for the same Messiah that the Orthodox Jews and the Muslims are still looking for today. One that comes, kicks out whoever's in charge, and puts them in charge.
Right.
But we're not supposed to be in charge. We're supposed to love each other and let Jesus be in charge.
Amen. So what am I looking at here? What there's to the left, we see smaller stones. To the right,
and this would be the northern tower of Baal's arch.
Wow.
There is, and you can tell where the seam is, where the big stones, the megalithic stones, but right up against the little ones, proving without a shadow of a doubt that the Islamic people, all they did was add on to what was there originally, which was Baal's arch. In fact, the arch is filled in with small stones, and so they could defend a small doorway instead of a huge doorway, because after all, they built the fortress on the Damascus road to defend the Damascus, well, to defend what they were in charge of now. They had come and kicked out the Crusaders, so they built this fortress to guard the Damascus road to keep them out.
So right here, you can see part of the arch.
That's right.
Yeah, very.
There's a lot more of that.
Right there. And there of course, is Pan. That is, I'll never forget that. When I looked at that, I went, oh my gosh, this is in front of Nimrod's fortress.
This is what you see today.
Right.
You see that huge debris field of the top of the arch that fell off in a big earthquake. And there is earthquake damage throughout the whole of Nimrod's fortress, because this place shook bad. And of course, an arch is top heavy, so the whole top of the arch fell over, mostly on the downhill side, but there's still quite a bit of it on the uphill side.
Okay. And that's sort of a panorama shot.
That's a panorama of how that Nimrod's fortress stands up all by itself on its very own ridge that literally everybody can see all the way across the Hula Valley. Everyone saw the light show. Guaranteed.
Well, let me get out of here. Thomas, I mean, that was just so informative. And folks, I don't know whether we're ever going to get back to Israel. It's been 2 years now. We were slated to do a tour. If things calm down and the war stops, I will lead another On the Trail of a Nephilim tour. And one of those places we go is actually we hook up with Thomas, and Thomas lectures the group from the Cave of Pan all the way up into Nimrod's castle and the whole deal. So if it happens again, if we do a tour, it'll be in the fall, not this fall, the way things are going, just not going to do it. But we'll see what happens. I just love your passion for the Lord Jesus, fully God, fully man. And it's checkmate up on Mount Hermon, because just a short time later, he's in Jerusalem, and we get the procession on Sunday, which fulfills scripture to the second, to the nanosecond. And then after
that's right.
His crucifixion.
From the transfiguration. Whoop, we froze up again. Exactly 6 months later, from the transfiguration, is Passover.
Right.
And we know he was crucified on Passover as the Passover lamb.
So if people want to donate to your ministry, how do they do that?
Well, I am the Holy Land Research Institute.
HolyLandResearch.com.
That's right. The Holy Land Research Institute.org. But there isn't any other. So that's all you have to do is type in. And I also have not just my own website where everybody can go to donate. And believe me, we need to build a church here, because there is no church where Jesus declared his church.
Wow.
How about that? And I have the opportunity of a lifetime that no one has had for maybe hundreds and hundreds of years to actually build that church, because I've been adopted by the Syrian Druze right here. And it's an opportunity that we shouldn't let go by.
Amen. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us today. Very informative. We'll have to have you back. So much information. Again, folks, check out his website. And if you feel led to help build that church, that would be a real great thing to do. Thanks so much for.
Well, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, LA. You're always in my prayers. You need as much prayers as I do, believe me, because we're on the front lines. Yeah. We're actually doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're not sitting on the couch. We're not keeping our mouths shut. We're actually out there on the trail. I'm on the trail of the transfiguration.
No, I get
literally on the Damascus Road. By the way, this is where it's the same place that Paul got blinded while he was on the road to Damascus.
Amazing.
In a light, and met Jesus. Say almost the same story.
Wow. That's it, folks. Remember, there is a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. That's why we are on the trail of the Nephilim.